Theoden had Grima Wormtongue. The Sultan of Agrabah had Jafar. Horus had Erebus.
It seems you can't be a fictional ruler without some evil advisor bending your ear, trying to get you to act not in your subjects' best interests, and in fact, benefit someone else.
Or something else. F*** Erebus, by the way. All my homies hate Erebus.
And these advisors are obviously based on real-world figures who historically tried to influence kings and queens, emperors and presidents. The difference being, of course, that the fictional versions are trying to get the ruler to do something cartoonishly evil as to be implausible, such as sacrifice millions of people for their own financial gain.
Oh, but climate change?
Sorry?
That's been happening.
That's real?
If you've watched this channel before, it will not come as a surprise that the Earth's climate is changing. It is changing because of human emissions of CO2 building up in the atmosphere, and most of these CO2 emissions are caused by the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. The burning of fossil fuels and the resulting climate change have negative impacts on billions through increasing risk of extreme weather events, health impacts like air pollution, decreased food security and water availability, and many other mechanisms.
The blame for these harms can therefore be laid with the companies that extract, process, and sell fossil fuels. Though, in fairness, these companies didn't know that their products would create such enormous harm when they started selling them and the world became dependent on their use. But when they did learn that their products were causing irrevocable harm to the climate, as they did 50 years ago, they suppressed this information and instead sought to sow doubt about the nascent field of climate science. They didn't want a small little thing like massive ecological damage to cut into their profits. Specifically, the companies wanted to prevent any kind of government policy that would interfere in the energy market or regulate environmental harm by industry.
I've lost track of how many times I've recommended this book, but to learn in detail how they did this, copying the playbook and even the experts from previous campaigns by tobacco companies suppressing medical studies about the risks of smoking, read Merchants of Doubt by Oreskes and Conway. It will piss you off.
Now there's an endorsement. The key thing to understand though is that these companies realized that directly talking to the public or directly lobbying politicians was effective up to a point, but kind of obvious, like anybody could see from a mile away that these companies had an agenda.
So instead they realised it was more effective to get someone else to do the messaging for them, funding groups that also opposed environmental regulations and government energy policy, and encouraging them to write articles, opinion pieces, scientific papers, wherever they could get them published, and talk to politicians on their behalf.
Arguing, of course, that fossil fuels were the best way to power the economy, that regulations on carbon emissions were counterproductive, and that renewable energy technologies were too unreliable and actually environmentally damaging. In practice, this meant the industry funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into libertarian and right-wing think tanks, who, by their very nature, opposed further government regulation. Starting in the 80s and 90s, these think tanks churned out documents casting doubt on climate science and downplaying the significance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Perhaps the most influential of these groups was the George C. Marshall Institute, founded in 1984 by Fred Seitz, Robert Jastrow, and Bill Nierenberg, initially to comment on Cold War defense policy, but quite rapidly pivoted to climate skepticism.
They were so influential because, via lobbying White House Chief of Staff John Sununu, they prevented a legally binding global agreement on reducing carbon emissions in 1989, as detailed in a previous video. Check this one out, it's good.
Apparently, I pronounced Sununu's name wrong that entire video, and I want to be very clear, I do not care. The man is a Darth Vader level villain. I'm not going to give him the respect of getting his name right. The Conservative Transparency Project combed through the almost 1,000 publicly available forms on how the George C. Marshall Institute was funded, and found the top 3 donors were the Linda and Harry Bradley Foundation, a leading source of financing for American conservatives, the Sarah Scaife Foundation, which got a lot of its money from Gulf Oil, and ExxonMobil. Yeah, that ExxonMobil. Paying to indirectly kill off a climate treaty that could have severely curtailed global warming by 2100. The Institute officially disbanded in 2015 after it basically became too well known and it lost its credibility. But many organizations, including the CO2 Coalition, which is basically its successor, continue its work of spreading doubt in climate science, flat out lying about climate science, and opposing any new government policy that would cut into the fossil fuel fuel industry. An incomplete list of organizations that continue to accept fossil fuel money in exchange for peddling such lies would include
the Heartland Institute, the CO2 Coalition, the Cato Institute, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, the American Enterprise Institute, the American Legislative Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the Institute for the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research.
I downloaded the publicly available funding data for these 12 climate skeptic organizations from DSMOG, which is a fantastic resource and source of investigative journalism on this subject. Please do check them out. Over the time the data was available, these organizations received over $1.1 trillion of funding, with 102 organizations each contributing over $1 million, 2 of which being ExxonMobil and Shell. The top 5 donors each gave more than $50 million to these think tanks. We've already heard of the Linda and Harry Bradley Foundation and the Sarah Scaife Foundation, but the top donor by far, Freedom Partners, is basically the private bank of the Koch family, which got its money from refining crude oil. Charles and David Koch, the 2 brothers that, well, there's actually one of them now, were arguably the financiers of the global climate skeptic movement. Meanwhile, Donors Trust, with its anonymous donors policy, is known as the dark money ATM of the American conservative movement. And while neither it nor Donors Capital Fund have a specific position on climate change, they only finance those groups that oppose climate legislation.
In fact, if you want an example of how these guys work, Greenpeace did an undercover investigation into Donors Trust. They approached a well-known climate skeptic, asking him to produce a scientific paper for a fictional Middle Eastern oil company. The skeptic recommended they channel the money through Donors Trust to the CO2 Coalition, of which he was a member, with Donors Trust confirming that they could anonymously transfer the money from the oil company to the skeptic in exchange for a paper confirming and promoting their views.
But after hearing all this, a very reasonable question to ask, and I get this asked often on social media, is, okay, but who's funding you? Well, I'll tell you. This past financial year, 29% of my revenue came from sponsored videos, by definition, very public. 16% came from Google AdSense, ads on my videos. 4% came from public speaking, that's giving lectures to kids about topics in maths and physics. And various small revenue streams total 5%, including Amazon affiliate links. For example, if you buy Merchants of Doubt at the link in the description, I get a small kickback from that at no extra cost to you. The remaining 49% of my funding came from Patreon. So if you want to know who finances me, the answer is largely you. The collective you. If the singular you would like to help me make more videos, but also get access to exclusive content every month, notably a really slick behind the scenes vlog, watch videos before anyone else, and at the producer tier and higher, vote on a video topic a month, then you can sign up at the link in the description. Thank you so much to everybody who already does so. I hope you can see just how vital your support is.
With a special thanks to Darius Stultz, Josh, and Sarah K for supporting my work.
Conservative think tanks and advocacy groups financed by the fossil fuel industry have been undeniably effective. They are, quote,
the key organizational components of a well-organized climate change counter-movement that has not only played a major role in confounding public understanding of climate science, but also successfully delayed meaningful government policy actions to address the issue.
That paper is specifically talking about America, where most of the research on the impact of these think tanks has been done, and where climate action has been most spectacularly delayed.
Though this isn't just limited to America, there has been a rise in climate skeptic organizations worldwide, and there are many right-wing think tanks in Europe, for example, the Stockholm Network.
And perhaps the think tank at the forefront of the climate skeptic movement, in the US at the very least, is the Heartland Institute, who have a page on DSMOG as long as a very long person's arm. They post articles, host conferences for climate skeptics, have an unhinged YouTube channel, and contribute opinion pieces to other organizations. In fact, just earlier this month, while researching the LA wildfires, I came across this article from Fox News 2 years ago, called "Wildfires Aren't Getting Worse Because of Climate Change," with this quote.
Despite countless statements from liberals and climate activists over the past 2 decades about the dangers of wildfires and extreme weather events caused by climate change, the available evidence overwhelmingly shows that no such connection exists. Wildfires are not becoming more frequent or burning more acreage.
And who wrote this? But Justin Heskins, a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute, who has written 8 anti-climate think pieces for Fox News in the past 5 years. It's difficult to find the words to describe the people working for these organizations. Like, on a certain level, I get why people work for the fossil fuel industry. Right now, the world still depends on these fuels, and even though we want to see their use plummet in the coming decades, for the time being, somebody's got to make them. But people working for these think tanks are accepting money from that industry and knowingly, because that's the thing, these are intelligent people, knowingly spreading misinformation. Outright lies about the science, and lies that they know have had enormous negative consequences and will continue to have enormous negative consequences.
Need I remind you, for example, that air pollution caused by burning fossil fuels, air pollution that would have been diminished in a world without these think tanks, causes an estimated 5 million excess deaths a year. Their misinformation is literally killing people. It's bleaching the world's corals, killing entire species of plants and animals. But they're getting paid, so they don't care. I don't like to use the word evil much, apart from Erebus. F*** Erebus. But it's difficult to paint these people as anything other than evil. And they've just arrived in the UK.
Last month, the Heartland Institute launched its UK branch, seeking to influence politics in the UK and across Europe. The Institute president, Hannes Teare, said, quote,
"During recent years, a growing number of policymakers in the UK and continental Europe have requested Heartland establish a satellite office to provide resources to conservative policymakers throughout Europe. With our UK and European launch, we aim to fulfill this requested impact throughout Europe."
And who should be attending this launch but future pub quiz question answer Liz Truss and occasional attendee of Parliament Nigel Farage, both leading members of the right to far right of UK politics. What's happening here is very obvious. The Heartland Institute, and by extension its funders, want to replicate their success in preventing effective climate policy in the UK and Europe, where so far such policy has been very effective. Carbon emissions have decreased by 45% in the UK and 30% in Europe since the year 2000. And in the UK specifically, the ambition to get to net zero, currently the ambition is by 2050, is becoming a political battle line. Every single day, the Labour Party and its allies on the political left come under attack by the right-wing press, while the right-wing Reform UK party has made anti-net zero a cornerstone of its identity. And there's also some suggestions that the Tories will soon abandon net zero too. I wonder why.
Climate skeptics across the pond have sensed that a rift is opening in UK politics. What they are trying to do is intensify that rift, pushing people on the political right further away from net zero as a target, and most probably use their funding and network of right-wing parties across the globe, including President Trump's Republican Party, to promote their UK equivalents. This isn't without precedent. They actually did the same thing in Europe last year with the EU's nature law, supporting far-right parties across the continent.
If they are successful, the UK will be undoing an enormous amount of progress in reducing carbon emissions, overhauling our electricity grid, and expunging climate denial from our political system. I don't think we'll see a return to the outright denial of the existence of climate change. I think even the fossil fuel industry recognises that fight is lost. But we will see an increasing pressure put on decarbonisation and the question of if and when we should get to net zero.
If you see a politician, especially in the Tory party, suddenly start to question whether we need to get to net zero, if we shouldn't be expanding oil and gas in the North Sea, if renewables are just too unreliable and too expensive, it will be because Grima Wormtongue, the Heartland Institute, is in their ear. Paid off by billionaires seeking to protect their increasingly obsolete businesses, uncaring about the damage their lies are doing, so long as they keep making money.
The George C. Marshall Institute disbanded because everybody knew what they were doing. The most effective counter to these people is to shine the world's brightest light on what they are doing and who is paying for it. If you want to stay up to date in that regard, I cannot recommend DSmog and their newsletter highly enough. There'll be a link in the description for you to sign up to that. And the next time you see a violently anti-net zero opinion piece somewhere in the press, have a look at who wrote it. Google them. see what else they've been up to. I think you know what you might find.
Oh, I'm just reading now. The latest person working for Heartland UK has been announced. It's
Erebus!
So when I downloaded all this funding data about climate skeptic organisations, there were nearly 1,000 entries spread across different spreadsheets. So what I did was whack it all in one CSV file and then wrote a little Python script that scanned through all the entries and summed up the contributions from the same donor to different organisations. That's how I made this leaderboard.
Doing this manually would have taken forever, but I was able to code it, and still had enough time to make a bunch of mistakes, in like 15 minutes. Having the ability to just write a bit of code to automate a task like this is super useful.
But many people don't know how to code, or really know how a program like this one even works. If that's you, and you'd like a free way to learn, you should check out Brilliant, who have kindly sponsored this video.
Brilliant is an app and website that teaches topics in programming, maths, and data science, from introductory courses to a high level. For example, if you're completely new to programming, you might want to start with their Thinking in Code course, and after that, maybe Applied Python. And then maybe get creative with code, or learn how large language models like ChatGPT work. When I first learned to code, which was in my first year of uni, I was pretty terrible at it, I'm not gonna lie. It took me a while to grasp the fundamentals, and I can say with absolute certainty that if I had taken the Thinking in Code course on Brilliant, either alongside my degree or on its own, it would have saved me a lot of heartache.
All of their courses have an emphasis on interactivity, with their programming courses in particular featuring a drag and drop code editor that lets you get stuck in right away. That's a key thing about Brilliant. They're all about eroding the barriers between learning a new concept and actually implementing it. Their beautifully illustrated courses are designed around this idea by award-winning educators and researchers.
To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, head to brilliant.org/Simon Clark or scan the QR code on screen. And if you like what you find there, you can also use that link to get a 20% discount on an annual subscription, either for yourself or as a gift for someone else. That link again, brilliant.org/Simon Clark, to learn new skills in maths, data science, and programming in a fun, interactive way. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to learn much more about the activities of these climate skeptic organizations, again, cannot recommend DSmog highly enough. Check the description for a link to them. Also linked in the description, thank you so much Nando and Jason for providing the voices for some real bastards. If you enjoyed this video, please do the YouTube pleasantries, share it with a friend, pop it a like, leave a comment, that kind of thing. If you'd like to watch something else from me next, here's 2 videos I prepared earlier. And that just leads me to say thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.